Women Innovators. Interviews with women with big messages and big missions, sharing their stories to inspire you to live your passion and step up to make the world a better place. Here's your host, Tami Patzer.
This is Tami Patzer, and I'm really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Sherrie Wilson. Sherrie was the first female firefighter-paramedic in the Dallas Fire Rescue Department. She is the author of Faith on Fire, and she's a dynamic woman leader in a man's world. Sherrie is also a health and safety expert, serves as an outside expert on cardiac science to the American Heart Association, and an OSHA Adjunct Faculty for Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service. Welcome, Sherrie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and I am really excited because how often do I get to speak to a person who was told by a man that she couldn't, but you did? How phenomenal is that? Can you tell me who you help?
Who I help? Well, basically my biggest clientele is businesses and industry. We go in and do corporate training programs in health and safety, everything from CPR all the way up to OSHA classes, and then also leadership classes.
So how many different instructors and speakers have you helped over the years?
Well, I'm sure it's thousands, but I currently have, because instructors come and go, but I currently have 644 instructors in 32 states. And it was a small business idea that I started as a firefighter. You know, we have 2 days off, and I just started it to make extra money. And it's now grown into what it is, and I love it. You know what it does? It allows me to continue to save lives just in a different way, and actually in a more powerful way, because when I'm doing CPR on a person or I'm running a cardiac event on a person, I'm saving one person. But when I'm speaking to a room of 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people, each one of them have 1,000 people in their life that they could touch with the skills that I teach. And so it just gives me, I don't know, it's just part of my purpose is to teach us how to take care of one another.
Wow, that is amazing when you think about it, that for every person you teach a skill, such as CPR, of course, that puts them into the position where they can save a life or multiple lives. So you do a lot with the leadership. Tell me more about that.
Well, I have so many instructors, and they, like me, want to grow and become better and do a better job. And so we're not just a training center. We issue the credentials for the Heart Association, and we hold the contract. And then we have to do all the QA for all of these instructors. So if there's an issue, we have to take care of it. And, you know, I just found that over the years that what was missing that would make a difference to my team is leadership skills. I mean, they're being trained in business and they're being trained in how to teach and how to maintain equipment, but nobody was taking them to that next level, to becoming a real leader that really moves and inspires people. And so I went about this process of training myself and learning and growing. And I flew to Washington, D.C. for like 6 months straight, taking this long leadership course where that I was not only a leader, but I was actually an instructor that taught leadership. And then I brought it back. And now if you are going to be a training center faculty member, if you're going to train other instructors, if you're going to have any kind of responsibility where you have others underneath you, you now have to have leadership training too.
So when you're working with people for leadership training, what do you find is the biggest obstacle for someone becoming a leader?
You know what? I'm glad you asked that question because I know you're going to think this is crazy, but the number one thing that stops people in life is their belief systems, and their belief systems that they don't even know exist. Things that drive them, like a man on the dance floor. He's got his hand at your back, and he's moving you around, and you don't even know where the next step is coming, but you're pushed in a certain way. And what happens is most people don't want to dig up those belief systems, but I think we're challenged to do that if we really want to grow. You know, we need to take those belief systems and shine them under a light and dust them off and take a real look at them and study. You know, in the book Faith on Fire, the subtitle is "The First Ingredient of a Miracle is an Impossible Situation." So people are sitting there going, I don't know why this keeps happening to me. Well, if there's something that is repetitively happening in your life, it's probably a belief system that you're not even aware, okay? And I do believe there's a conscious and a subconscious mind, and I believe that subconscious or unconscious mind drives us. And what we have to do is we have to talk about it. We have to bring it up, shine it in the light, dust it off, and look at that belief system, and then take some steps to make a decision and make a choice to choose something different. You know, if you don't like change, you're going to like your own irrelevance even less. And so I challenge people to change. And that's why I call myself a catalyst for change. And I just have to preface this with, I had to change. When I came out of the fire department and I retired after 35 years, I could not keep some of those old winning strategies that worked very well for me in firefighting and in paramedic world. But they didn't work well for me in this business world that I was now thrust into full time. And I saw that as a weakness. And most of us want to be bold, and we think, you know, we have this highly self-flattering view. And I had to really assess myself. I had to do what we call a size up on the fire that was burning in my own heart. And I had to look at it, and I had to say, young lady, you need some leadership skills. You think you know leadership, but you really don't. And then, you know, I went back into school and started studying psychology and started looking at the reason I tick the way I tick. And then I had to create some new possibilities for myself inside of that. And so that's the kind of work that goes on in leadership. It's really not about what you do. It's all about who you be for others. Now, I know grammatically that might not work for some of your listeners out there, but technically that's what we're talking about. Who are you being in life?
So one of the things, I'm really fascinated with this concept of leadership, especially because of where you're coming from, obviously Faith on Fire, and coming from where you are literally making leadership choices out in the field that could mean the difference between life and death. Do you have, we don't have to be that dramatic, but I know that you have some proven steps that people can take to really get fired up with your leadership and your life and your career and your possibilities. Do you think you could share some of those with us?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think first is to do a self-assessment. I mean, you have to really look at you, and I know this sounds crazy, but how you were raised. What belief systems are there? And I can tell you, inside of all this, you know, I have a Christian faith, and so some of the science things I felt very conflicted with, and I had to put that to bed. I had to work through those issues. But basically, you have to do a self-assessment. Once you do a self-assessment and you're honest in your assessment, I had to listen to others and feedback. is one of the tools that we use as educators. And, the first time somebody tells you something, you can think about it and you can go, well, maybe that could be, man, I don't really see how that works. But if you hear it from a different person a second time, it's time to take a look in the mirror. But if you hear some feedback a third time, somebody has told you something or a different person has told you something for the third time, in Texas we say it's time to settle up. You've got to own it, and you've got to take action. And most of us inside of our highly self-flattering view don't want to do that. We think that we're perfect, or we think that, we've got it going on and that we're right. And the science also shows that most people would rather be right than have love or money. That means you will actually give up relationships with people in order to stand inside of being right. And when you are so right that you make other people wrong, it's really an ugly right, and there's no room for that inside of leadership. You have to be willing to ebb and flow through life and give and take. There's a quantum physics law. It's called the law of entanglement. I kind of like to refer to it as the ripple effect. Any step you take, anything you do here where you're at right now can affect people all across the globe. It can. And so let's say that I have a man that's down on the street and he's a cardiac arrest and we save his life and he happens to be from another country and it affects his family and his family has standing in that city or in that country, and therefore it affects that city or it affects that country. So everything we do, we have to think about how's it going to impact others. And see, people have good intentions, right? I mean, if I ask a room of 100 people, do you have good intentions? They're all going to raise their hand. But does their intentions match their impact? And so part of leadership is looking at our good intentions and making sure that our impact lands the way we intend it to, not just what our intentions. See, most people think their intentions is what other people receive. That's not what they receive. That's what you think you give. What other people receive is your impact. And I'm going to tell you, as a firefighter, I could go in and kick down doors and put out fires and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very powerful and pushy and forceful way of being. When I came into the business world, it no longer worked. And I had to do something. I had to change. I had to look at myself. And so the biggest and most important responsibility that we have is to really assess ourselves. And that's step one. The rest of it is just going through the motions, but being willing to become a leader, being willing to look at yourself, your past, your history, and get it all out there on the table and see how it's playing out in your life. That's the biggest, most important step anybody can take.
Wow. So, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about leaders and leadership, and over the course of my own personal history, times when I had stepped up to be a leader and other times when I had bosses or people who were in charge of me who I knew they had no clue because they weren't operating from any place other than, an ego place. Uh-huh. And it's really interesting. In the book, you talk about the witnessing miracles in life through faith, belief, and perseverance. Can you just share an example of maybe a leadership story that maybe is shared in Faith on Fire, or something that comes to mind that gives us a good visual of leadership in action?
Leadership in action. The best story that I can tell you is a story of a chief that I worked for. His name was David Baker. And David's agreed to let me use his name. I've used his name in the book, too. And I want to tell you, he was profoundly the most impactful man in my life. And it was because of who he was being with me. I had been agitated. I had had my mask disconnected during a fire. I had had all kinds of things happen to me that so spiritually and emotionally and mentally, I was not where I needed to be. I just really wasn't. But I was, physically I was fit. I could do the job. I was sharp as a tack when it came to doing things in the office and things like that. So we got along great. But I bounced my thoughts and my ideas off of this man. Now, he was much older than me, very father-like, very loving and related to me. And he heard me. And not only did he hear me, but he appreciated me for what I was good at. And what I wasn't good at, he would give me positive, but I'm going to say really maybe not positive. It was neutral feedback. So he would say, well, just consider that if you look at it that way. And the other thing that he did was he would ask questions that triggered my critical thinking skills. And so what kind of questions are those? Well, you can ask a close-ended question. How old are you? I'm 23, or whatever the answer may be. That's a closed-ended question. But if you answer a question like, well, how do you see this playing itself out? And when you ask those kinds of questions, people have to go inside, and they have to start thinking critically to come up with answers. And when you can walk someone through that process of asking them questions, and they can self-actualize the answer themselves, it becomes a sticky lesson. So he wasn't saying, Sherrie, do this. He was saying, Sherrie, how do you see this working? And then I would go into my mind and I would say, well, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do that. And he'd say, well, what about the ramifications of doing the first way? Okay, what about it for the second way? And I would come to a conclusion based on the questions that he was asking. And then my highly self-flattering view was all happy because, wow, I figured it out on my own. When in reality, he walked me through the process. So leadership takes time, and it takes attention, and it takes a relationship. And I had an awesome relationship with this man. There was a lot of times when I was single when I first got on the department. And, there was a lot of dating different firemen, and then I found out really quick I didn't want to do that because it didn't work for me in the workplace. Well, this was the first man that just really had no intentions other than to just build me. And I was so wowed and so floored by that. I would do anything for that man today. I really would, still to this day. I would do anything for him. He was an awesome leader. That's all I can tell you. And that example to me, I just remember thinking, wow, I want to be like that. I want to learn that. I want to care about people this way. I want to impact people so that they feel valued, they feel appreciated, they feel like they can do anything because, he was the wind underneath my wings. Now, my husband was too. Don't think for a minute he wasn't. He was awesome. He's been the number one thing I've done right in my life, and he actually is very much like this too. He's a great leader in our family and a family head, and on top of that, he lets me be me. And I'm like out there, I know everybody, I'm going places, I'm doing things, and he just is Mr. Steady and Mr. Critical He just triggers my critical thinking skills, and I love it.
That's really cool. Also, you said two things that I wanted to ask you about. You said a good leader is neutral, and then you also said sticky lessons. Can you talk more about the neutral leader and what that means, and then about sticky lessons and about how powerful those are? And that was a beautiful example of those two men, the firefighter and then the man that you ultimately married, who is steady. Like you said, he's a steady critical thinker. But those two things really stood out to me, being a neutral leader and sticky lessons.
Well, neutral leader. I was raised by a mother that was very passionate, and I've been very passionate. You know, I want to save lives. I want to rip people from the jaws of death. I mean, there was a lot of fire in me, so to speak. But as I moved out of the fire department and into running my business full time, I had to become more neutral. I had to settle down. I had to calm down. I was actually in an identity crisis in the beginning because I had been a firefighter-paramedic so long, 35 years, most of my life had been spent doing this. And now I was dealing with people in a different way, and I had to learn to become neutral in my responses. So the passion, I still keep it for when I'm speaking up in front of a group or something like that, but when I'm talking to you, rarely do I have emotional charge. So it's easy to get emotionally charged as a firefighter or a paramedic when you're going up against death or you're going up against disaster. But when you're going up against a instructor who's in trouble because they failed to honor the integrity of their agreement inside of their teaching, you can't be impassioned. You have to be neutral. You have to give people chances. You have to look at them as if their intentions are good. Their impact was not. And then you have to redirect. And, I mean, just think about it. If I was going to be fiery with you and you felt fear or you felt afraid, you wouldn't really want to respond to me. You'd probably move away to another training center, you know. However, if I'm there in a supportive role to lovingly help you correct those mistakes and to get you back on track, then it changes. It's a game changer. And so I really believe inside of leadership, there is a time for some passion, but I think generally speaking, in your relationships with people, you want to be neutral. Now, I have a friend that deals with depression, and she was talking about, she didn't want to live. Now, I have to admit that firefighter-paramedic came out in me, and I was very impassioned. I'm like, we are going to work through this. You have got, there's time for that. There is time for that. But generally speaking, you don't have to have that level of passion. You don't have to be cold and icy. You get to be somewhere in the middle. That's why my next book is called Courageous Leadership. And the subtitle of it is A Mission of Fire and Ice, ? It's really not the fire, and it's really not the ice, the cold, hateful way of being. It's really a neutral, loving, supportive way of being. That's what leaders build people. That means if they're broken down, you help them put themselves back together, and you build them up, and you give them chances. I like chances, don't you, Tami? I mean, haven't you needed chances? I've needed them.
Every day, I think.
Every day, yes.
Even in little things in life, because you want to instill the desire to try something new so that you can move forward. And sometimes things don't always work. So you don't want to be punished for trying to do something to move forward. Just like you said, the intention to do good is there, but the impact might not be what you intended. And I really like that, how you explained that, because it really makes it very understandable. And when you apply it to leadership, and I understand exactly what you mean about your fire chief, that to this day, you would do anything to help that man because of the value he brought to you as you were growing and going through all of the different things that you went through. So I really understand that. That's really phenomenal. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, your training center. You actually are a training center for the American Heart Association and OSHA, and you're training for the health and the safety and leadership. What are some of the big misconceptions people bring to the table when they're either learning to be instructors and leaders for the American Heart Association and OSHA? What is it that they don't always get?
Well, one of the lessons that I learned early as a firefighter was high-performance team dynamics. And I learned it not only at the fire department, but also at the American Heart. So I want you to just think of a physician, a nurse, a couple of nurses, maybe a tech or two, and they're working the emergency room. And a patient comes in that's a cardiac arrest. That's a very critical event. And we have to have high-performance team dynamics in play. Well, those same high-performance team dynamics are effective in the workplace, too. As a matter of fact, it's all about building relationships with people. So what is high-performance team dynamics? Number one, it's being clear about what your responsibility is, whatever that responsibility may be. And then it's clear in your communication. And then it's also showing mutual respect for people. Now, I'm going to tell you, a lot of the stuff I see coming across Facebook and on the news is people are horribly disrespectful to one another. Leaders are not disrespectful to people, even those that are disrespectful to them. They remain neutral, they remain calm, and they remain steady. So showing mutual respect to people is critical. And then there's something called constructive intervention. Constructive intervention, it can make the difference in life and death in a cardiac emergency. To give you an example, I was working a cardiac code with a doctor once, and he ordered me to give 3 milligrams of epinephrine. Now, what he intended to say was 0.03 milligrams of epinephrine. But in the emergency and in all the chaos, he said 3 milligrams. Now, I'm just a lowly paramedic. So I could have followed his order exactly, or I could have said, which I did, Doc, you ordered 3 milligrams. Didn't you mean 0.03 milligrams? And he goes, what did I say? You said 3. He goes, no, 0.03. You're right. Thank you. And had I given those 3 milligrams just because he's the doctor, we would have all killed the patient. But we were all part of the team. Now, what's critical inside of constructive intervention is that you show respect. I didn't say, Doc, are you stupid or something? I just said, hey, Doc, you ordered 3. You meant 0.03, right? You see? And so I was not only constructively intervening, I was knowledge sharing with him. Okay? Now, I know my limitations, and my limitations are that I have to follow his order. I also closed the loop on the communication. He gave an order. I repeated it back. Doc, you said 3. Didn't you mean 0.03? So closing the loop on things. So if I tell you, Tami, okay, I need you to do this, you could say, yes, ma'am, and walk away and not be clear. But if you say back to me, Sherrie, you said do this, this, and this, do I have that right? Yes. You're closing the loop on the communication. And then, we're constantly summarizing and reevaluating what's going on and adjusting things so that as a team, we're producing this product. That's what we want. And really, inside of high-performance team dynamics, we're all leaders. If you have a weak member of the team, the job of the other members is to lift them up. It's not to push them down or push them out. It's to lift them up. That's what leadership is. That's what high-performance team dynamics is. And what a lot of teams tend to do is the new kid on the block gets made fun of, gets made pushed down, and what happens is they lose their heart for the work and they move on. And in some cases, it's probably a good thing. I moved on from my first job and actually found my true passion in life. So that's why I say the first ingredient of a miracle is an impossible situation. Well, that first job in my life was pretty impossible, and now look what I have. So I really believe things happen for a reason. I think some people need to be moved on, but most of the time inside of leadership, your job is to build people. If it's not a fit for them, they will move on. They will. So those are some of the things that I speak on and I teach on. And high-performance team dynamics can be used with your children. See, what a lot of parents do is they won't even hear their child. They think it's their job to say these are the rules and they're final. They need to let their children talk. They need to hear what they're saying, and they need to learn to teach them to negotiate and to stay neutral inside their conversations. Most parents, what do? They get impassioned because it's their child, and they love this child so much they don't realize that their impact doesn't land for the kid, whereas their intention is really good, right? So yes. Does that answer one of them?
Yes. Obviously, I'm mesmerized listening to you because leadership in today's world is something that every person really should have leadership training because we need to work, like you said, in a dynamic team environment, and it impacts the whole world. So I want to wrap up this interview, but before I do, number one, I'm inviting you back. So everyone listening, we haven't heard the last of Sherrie Wilson and her catalyst for change. We will invite her back. But Sherrie, where can we find out more about you and your services?
Well, they can go, I have two websites, www.emresources, that's EMRESOURCES.net is my company, Emergency Management Resources, and they can find all the health and safety information there and all the courses that we do. If you go to my website, Faith on Fire, you can book me to speak, you can buy the book, you can book your leadership classes, whatever, there on that website. So I have two of them that you can go to.
And then, of course, your Sherrie C. Wilson or Sherrie Clark Wilson on Facebook or LinkedIn, and I will have this information in our show notes, so don't worry, people, you'll easily be able to find her. So again, Sherrie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You're so welcome. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
This is Tami Patzer. Go make it a great day.
You've been listening to Women Innovators with Tami Patzer. To learn more, please go to womeninnovatorsradio.com. And please do subscribe and share to spread the big messages and big missions to change the world.